With OLED monitors finally becoming mainstream, I thought it would be interesting to compare QD-OLED to what I personally believe to be the best mini-LED monitor available today for HDR gaming. In this video, I'll be sharing some side-by-sides between the Samsung Odyssey G80SD QD-OLED and Asus PG32UQX, which is a 1152 zone IPS-based mini-LED display. I want to preface this by mentioning that in this comparison, I actually had to limit the Asus to 1000 nits when I've measured it over 1700 nits, and that's because the brightness difference is so great between the two monitors that my camera would make the OLED look like it's practically turned off. This video actually came about after being pressured by my friend to see the difference for myself, since he was convinced my raving to him about how amazing OLED is for HDR gaming was just a honeymoon phase. Prior to this, I had never seen the Asus and was daily driving the Samsung QD-OLED for roughly a week, really expecting the mini-LED monitor to have no chance against OLED, but man was I wrong. After using these side by side for a couple days, I can unanimously say that the Asus PG32UQX absolutely destroys all of the current OLED monitors on the market when it comes to HDR. It's such a stark difference in performance that I'm not even sure if calling these OLED monitors HDR capable is truthful. By that I mean they don't really provide an HDR experience unless confined to very specific scenarios where the content isn't very demanding and there aren't many highlights on the screen. Sure, that works perfectly for very dark games like Dead Space or the Resident Evil series, as well as some movies with black bars, but for practically every other situation, the OLED just falls apart because of ABL washing out the scene, making it look like SDR. I know I'll catch shade for this, but more often than not, the mini-LED monitor makes the OLED look like garbage. You'd think the inverse would be true in very dark content with the OLED returning the favor, but I just don't find that to be the case. The PG32UQX holds its own even in very dark games and movies. It only really falters due to bloom in worst-case scenario starfields or very dark scenes with singular small bright highlights, which frankly isn't a very frequent occurrence in most games. In comparison, the OLED's worst-case scenario of content demanding more than 5% peak brightness and not having the brightness headroom to deliver it is a far more frequent occurrence. After experiencing how transformative RTX HDR is, I don't really play any games in SDR anymore, but I do want to mention something that is often overlooked, which is just how much better the mini LED offering can make SDR content look because it's not limited by such low brightness. This can be important because I know some of you prefer a room with ambient light or to have some curtains open during the day, as not everyone is a hibernating bear or vampire that games in a pitch black environment to compensate for OLED being OLED. I also want to mention all of the stipulations that come with current QD-OLEDs. A big one is VRR flicker, which can vary from being a minor annoyance depending on how big the frame rate swings are, to being a complete showstopper. The PG32UQX in comparison has zero flicker, and by zero I mean zero. There is no scenario where I could induce flicker on it, even during shader compilation. This is thanks to it using an IPS panel along with a hardware G-Sync module. VRR flicker is something that should be taken far more seriously by our viewers, since modern PC titles release in such horrific state, with horrible performance or frame time issues. The other big issue with QD-OLED, and one I find most significant, is that it's just not a plug-and-play experience. All of the QD-OLED monitor offerings on the market today provide you with HDR 400 and 1000 modes. You would think that it's a no-brainer picking between the two, but that's not at all the case. The HDR 1000 mode offers brighter highlights at the expense of brightness in medium to high brightness scenes, where it can dim to sub 200 nits. The HDR 400 mode sacrifices highlight brightness for a much brighter presentation in those medium to high brightness scenes. What this means is that there is no single set and forget setting that works best across all games and content, which is a huge annoyance in my opinion. Some games I prefer HDR 400, others HDR 1000. So having to switch back and forth is just a terrible user experience. The PG32UQX, on the other hand, just works across all content and requires nothing from the end user. I'm really not sure why more people aren't talking about this issue to push Samsung toward giving us more options, like a mode that fits right between the two, or just omitting the HDR certification altogether and developing a single HDR 1000 mode that behaves better. Is OLED contrast amazing? Absolutely yes. But is the difference versus a competent mini LED monitor that big? Not really. It's a marginal improvement. A lot of the OLED hype online is from people transitioning from globally lit LCDs to OLED, where the jump is understandably massive. Is OLED motion clarity amazing? Absolutely yes, especially at 240 Hz. But what I realized after gaming on it is that I'm never really achieving more than 140 to 150 FPS in AAA titles, even with an RTX 4090. In reality, I'm closer to the 120 FPS and below range. I gravitated toward OLED because I value image quality and tend to play games that push visuals, so I'm not really interested in running potato-looking esports titles or turning down settings to low and medium for the sake of bringing up my average FPS. Motion clarity is only one component of image quality, and for me personally, the difference in HDR impact, colors, and brightness of the PG32UQX greatly outweigh any motion clarity advantage the OLED has. Is QD-OLED color volume amazing? Yes, but really only for very small highlights. Anything bigger just washes out and looks poor next to the Asus, which can maintain its color vibrancy regardless of the highlight size. How does a mini LED monitor produce bloom? Of course, it's inherent to the technology, but just as mini LED blooms, OLED glooms, as in the entire screen dims when ABL triggers. I personally find the localized bloom of mini LED far less distracting than the entire screen dimming like crazy and essentially producing an SDR image depending on where you point the camera in a game. It's like a permanent eye adaptation effect that you see in games when going from outdoors to indoors or vice versa. OLED has tons of potential when it comes to HDR, but in the monitor space, it's just not there for me yet. I hope that in the next few years as technology advances, we'll at least get OLED monitors as bright as their TV counterparts. Meanwhile, it appears LCD has stagnated because this PG32UQX is now almost 3 years old and nothing has topped it in my opinion. I've tried them all from the Innocent 32M2V to Samsung Neo G8 to Acer X32. I hope manufacturers aren't abandoning Mini LED because it has its place in the market just as OLED does.